Hello, I'm John Kuhn of the AMPEX Training Department in Redwood City, California. In the next few minutes, I would like to talk about and demonstrate some of the aspects of perhaps one of the most important elements in television production, camera handling and operation. In conjunction with this discussion, I'll also be covering some of the basic principles of picture composition and framing. The subject of television production does not lend itself well to discussion. It's like trying to tell somebody how to drive a car. The person is actually going to have to get hands-on experience and do it before he can really get a feeling for what it's all about. At any rate, the purpose of this program is merely to familiarize the person interested in production with a few of the basics, various techniques that have been developed through the years that can make your job easier and also make your end product, your show, a much more polished video presentation. Some of the things I'll be covering will probably be old hat to some of you, but for the benefit of those who haven't heard it, we'll start from scratch and hopefully cover everything. Let's begin by reviewing the various parts of a television camera. This is a typical Vidicon camera designed for closed-circuit television. Essentially, there are three main parts of the camera. First, the lens and lens turret. This particular camera has a 4:1 variable focal zoom lens. You might have a camera with fixed lenses, most of which will accommodate 4 separate lenses. The most common complement, however, being 3 lenses, a 25 millimeter, a 50 millimeter, and a 75. The millimeter designation of a lens, of course, refers to its focal length and horizontal angle. The subject of lenses is a detailed one, so I won't take time here to discuss it. If, however, you have only one camera, I would strongly recommend that you have a zoom lens. On the other hand, if you have 2 cameras, your best bet is probably to have one with a zoom and the other with a fixed lens complement. The main body of the camera contains the Vidicon picture tube, as well as the host of necessary electrical circuitry. On the back of the camera, we see the viewfinder. This allows the cameraman to see the same picture his camera is taking or transmitting. This is a fairly large viewfinder, giving the cameraman a good reference for framing and focus. Speaking of focus, this knob here is the zoom focus as well as the zoom control. When using the zoom, it is necessary to set focus with both the lens focus adjustment and the optical focus located here on the side of the camera. To set focus with a zoom lens, you first zoom all the way into a close-up and set the lens focus. Then zoom all the way out and set the optical lens focus. Check it several times by zooming in and out to be sure it stays in focus. If it is set correctly, you should be able to zoom in and out and never lose focus, providing your subject doesn't move drastically toward or away from the camera, and providing you don't move the camera. With a fixed lens camera, you've only the optical focusing control on the side of the camera to worry about. A nice feature of this camera is its tally lights. There's one on top of the camera and one next to the viewfinder. If you're switching between 2 or more cameras, the tally light becomes very important. If the light is on, then the talent knows which camera to look at. Also, the rear tally light lets the cameraman know when his camera is hot or on the air. I might, in passing, just mention briefly the use of prompting devices, or idiot cards as they are commonly called. They can be a big help to someone who is nervous about giving speeches or unfamiliar with being in front of a camera. First of all, be sure to make the lettering clear and big enough to be seen from a distance. If at all possible, try to place the card close to the lens of the camera. This makes it appear that the person is talking directly to the audience. I've even seen cases where the talent was so glued to the idiot cards that they were raised so that the line being read was the same vertical height as the lens. If you're using 2 cameras, place the cards between the cameras and also try to have the cameras as close together as possible. Let's talk next about the pan head and tripod. There are many different types of mounting devices available on the market. Some use spring tensions, other fluid, and so forth. This one happens to be a cradle head. On the side here are 2 levers that allow the camera to be tilted up and down and panned left and right. The individual cameraman will have to adjust the amount of drag or tension for these 2 adjustments according to his own desires. If it is too loose, the cameraman has no control and the camera can shift or move on him. If these adjustments are too tight, a pan or tilt movement is jerky. This is the tripod. This particular one is made by Kwikset and is called a Hercules. Kwikset also makes a larger one as well as a smaller one, depending on your needs, the size of your camera, your studio, etc. The tripod is mounted on a 3-wheel dolly. The wheels are freewheeling to allow for rapid yet smooth camera mobility. We will discuss camera movements in just a minute, but first let's think about picture composition and framing. In deciding exactly what shot you want for any particular subject, you have two basic considerations. First of all, you must choose the field of view. In other words, what will the camera see? Will you show the whole set or one specific part of it? Will you use a close-up or a long shot? That's what's meant by field of view. Secondly, you must consider the angle of view. From which angle can your audience best see the subject, or if you will, the field of view? Should the subject be shot from the side, or from above, or perhaps from a low angle? At any rate, the most important thing to remember about field of view and angle of view is what it is you want your audience to see. How can the subject best be shown? Let's begin our discussion of picture composition by thinking about an opening of a show. There are no set rules, but the most widely used and generally accepted technique is to start in black and fade up on a long shot or an establishing shot. You do this to let your audience know where he is, what's going to be seen. An example might be a person sitting at a desk. Start by fading in on, say, a long shot or a medium long shot. Let the viewer know where the person is. You would probably never start with an extreme close-up of the person's face at the beginning of a show. This is too abrupt and too shocking. You might, however, start on an extreme close-up of an object in the person's hand and then pull back to reveal the person and his surroundings. But in the case of the standard establishing shot, after you have oriented your audience, move into a medium shot or a medium close-up. The audience is curious to get a better look at the man behind the desk. Let them see what he looks like. Then you can cut away to a chart or whatever else is to be seen next, if anything. Television pictures are, like any other pictures, subject to the conventional rules of composition. But there are factors peculiar to the television medium that will definitely influence your choice of picture composition. First of all, consider the size of the average television screen. It's small. To show things clearly, you must show them relatively large within the frame of the screen. In other words, you have to operate more with close-ups and medium shots than with long shots or extreme long shots. In television, you must work within a fixed frame with a standard aspect ratio of 3:4. If you want to show something extremely tall, you can't change the aspect ratio into a vertical framing. Either take a long shot to show the tall object, or tilt up and down the object with a closer shot. The pictures on a television screen are unfortunately two-dimensional. You must create the impression of a third dimension through the special arrangement of objects within the frame and the demonstration of relative size. Objects closer to you are bigger. Objects farther away are smaller. A good three-dimensional effect always needs a clear picture division into foreground, middle ground, and background. Correct lighting of a set can also help to create the three-dimensional effect. Be aware of picture balance. Don't, for example, have one picture area completely outweigh the other in terms of mass, color, or movement. Try to have a well-balanced picture with an identifiable center of interest. If you have vertical or horizontal lines in your picture, place them slightly beyond the center of the frame. In other words, don't separate your picture into two equal halves, either horizontally or vertically. If you have only one object in your picture, it is more interesting if it is not exactly dead center. That is, of course, unless you purposely want to emphasize that particular object. If you have a profile shot with a person looking to one side or the other, frame him toward the opposite side to which he is looking. In other words, lead the subject a little bit. Also, watch for odd juxtaposition of performers in set areas or props. Don't place objects directly above a person's head. Because of the two-dimensional aspect of television pictures, the object will appear to be sitting right on top of the person's head. Always be sure to leave plenty of headroom. Don't have it so the actor appears to be bumping his head on the top of the frame. It's very distracting. If you take an extreme close-up of a person's face, one that fills more than the screen, cut off the upper part of rather than the lower part. It is more important to see the person's lips move rather than his hairline. Let's examine some framing and staging techniques for an interview-type show with 2 people and 2 cameras. You could just put the people on the set and shoot straight on. This is rather awkward and uninteresting from a video standpoint. It would be much better to seat your talent facing each other with one, usually the interviewee, facing more toward the camera. Then you can cross-shoot and get a much better look at both people, plus get the feeling that they are talking to each other in a normal way. Let's turn our attention now to the various camera movements. Essentially, there are 5 basic camera movements: the pan, tilt, dolly, truck, and pedestal. Although the zoom is not necessarily a camera movement, we will include it in this discussion. When you pan, you move the camera horizontally. The primary reason for panning is to follow action. Generally speaking, the pan will be as fast as is necessary to follow the action. And again, always lead the action, don't follow it. Give the person a little room in front of them. For example, a man walking across a set. If you pan several stationary objects, pan slowly enough so the audience can clearly see them. And be careful of dead space. For example, if you have 2 objects that you wanted to see and they were spread fairly far apart, you pan slowly over the objects and then speed up in between. This helps to bridge the dead space. The tilt movement is essentially nothing more than vertical panning. In fact, you'll probably hear the term pan up or pan down just as often as you'll hear tilt up or tilt down. Again, tilting is used to follow action, such as a person standing up or sitting down. You might also tilt up or down to get a better view of the subject. The term dolly means the movement of the camera and tripod either away or toward the subject. When you dolly in, you enlarge the object on the screen. You can dolly in to see something more clearly or draw a special emphasis to one particular picture area. Depending on the speed of the dolly, you can make a strong emphasis with a fast dolly in, or a more subtle point with a slow dolly. There are a few points to remember when using the dolly movement. Generally, you never dolly with a zoom lens because you lose focus. With a fixed lens, you'll also lose focus, but you can adjust the optical focus knob while you dolly. On most cameras, you will turn the focus knob in the opposite direction that you are dollying. Check your camera to make certain. It's also important to be aware of which lens you are using when dollying. The wide-angle lens has a better depth of field, that is, a greater range of focus than a narrow-angle or long lens. A 90mm lens has a short depth of field and is much more sensitive to bumps and jerks than, say, a 25mm wide-angle lens. If you have only one camera and it is necessary to dolly in and then dolly out on the same subject, here's a little trick you can use to make it as smooth as possible. After you dolly in, turn to the right or left slightly so the wheels will be in a position to dolly out again without a lot of jerks that will show up on the screen. This technique takes practice, but it's a good one to know. Closely akin to the dolly movement is the zoom in or zoom out. The only difference between the zoom in and the dolly in is that the perspective of objects in relation to the camera does not change in the same manner. Don't worry too much about that. The most important thing to remember is to zoom or dolly smoothly, and unless you are trying to create a special effect, keep these 2 movements slow. Don't force the audience to become aware of camera movements. It's very distracting. The next camera movement that you should become aware of is the trucking movement. A truck is a lateral movement of the camera and tripod. The direction for such a move would be truck right or truck left. To show several laterally staged objects straight on, you can truck the camera along the objects, or you can use a truck to follow lateral action without changing the angle or the distance from the moving object. In a one-camera show, for example, you may have to truck to follow a performer from one set area to another. Again, smoothness is essential with the trucking movement. Another camera movement you might hear of is arc right or arc left. This is simply a combination of a dolly and a truck. An arc left might look something like this. The final camera movement you should become familiar with is the pedestal movement. This is perhaps more of an adjustment than a movement per se. It consists of raising or lowering the whole camera on the studio pedestal. Any good studio pedestal will have this capability. Say, for example, it is necessary for the camera to see something from a high angle. You would pedestal up and tilt down. The pedestal adjustment is also used to compensate for tall and short cameramen. Now that we have discussed the mechanics of picture framing and composition and movements and so forth, let's think for a minute about the aesthetics or philosophy of picturization. Television is a very comprehensive, if not pervasive, form of communication. You are dealing with the complex human senses of sight and sound, as well as the psychological aspects of your audience's emotions and subconscious. Never lose sight of the fact that every viewer in your audience is a potential critic with his own likes and dislikes. On a national basis, United States television sets are tuned in an average of 6 hours a day. Thus, for years, the average viewer has been exposed to broadcast quality type techniques. You must not distress or alienate them by presenting an ill-prepared, slipshod, unorganized type show. You, as one involved in television production, have the obligation to show your viewer what he wants to see and show it to him in the most pleasing manner possible. Every camera movement, as indeed every facet of production, must first be motivated. In other words, the audience must want the camera to be moved. If the camera moves without motivation, the viewer will be, so to speak, dragged away from something he is looking at. Second, each camera movement must retain interest and be continually gratifying throughout its duration. Think for a minute how disturbing it is when you're watching a football game and the camera is zoomed in on a tight close-up of a pile-up at the line of scrimmage. The quarterback runs back, throws a 50-yard touchdown pass that you never see. Quite obviously, the camera movement did not retain interest and was not continually gratifying. Finally, camera movement must achieve a purpose and have some value to the production as a whole. Don't show things just because you happen to think it's a pretty angle or a nice shot or isn't this interesting. Your audience might want to be seeing something else. To sum up this discussion, I think the two most important things to remember about camera movements are, first of all, keep your audience in mind at all times. Show them what he wants to see when he wants to see it. And secondly, keep your camera movements smooth and unobtrusive. Don't draw attention to the changes in field of view and angle of view. You don't want your viewers to become aware of the camera movements and miss the content of your show. The techniques and ideas I have mentioned here are by no means hard and fast rules. Television production, like all creative arts, is flexible. So don't be afraid to experiment and try new approaches. And for best results, use a reel of high-quality AMPEX tape. Thank you very much.